Hey, greetings, everyone. Welcome back to Finding Contentment. This is your host and executive director for the American Institute of Stress. It's Will Heckman. Thank you for joining us once again today. And I'd like to ask you, those of you that are listening to this podcast today, to take a moment, go to stress.org, subscribe to our magazines, check out all the information we have about stress and stress related issues. And if you're watching us, got to ask you, please hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe. All that happens is you get a notification when we put up another video. All right. You've probably heard that the Federal Health and Human Services Agency wants to take a fresh look at everything from nutraceuticals to chelation to see how they could be used to affordably treat chronic disease that affects many Americans. But there are questions. What exactly is chelation therapy and how does it impact individuals under stress who have been exposed to many toxic materials and toxic metals? And why is it so controversial? And also, what led RFK to become a strong advocate for it? Kennedy has been outspoken in criticizing the FDA for delaying chelation-based treatment and has vowed to expand public access to this therapy. But I needed to find out more about it and its implications, so I asked somebody to come on back on the show and explain it to us. He's a best-selling author whose work explores nutraceuticals and chelation therapy from traditional methods to cutting-edge nanotechnology. It's Douglas Mulhall. He's a co-founder of Elastrin Therapeutics. He helped launch the company following a University of South Carolina breakthrough aimed at enhancing effectiveness and reducing, of course, the cost of chelation. He has over 20 years of research in the field, and he's collaborated with leading practitioners, and he brings a deep insight into the evolving therapy. So join me in welcoming back my friend Douglas Mulhall. Douglas, thank you so much for being here. I got a lot of questions for you, buddy.
Well, it's great to be back. And this is going to be very interesting because most people haven't heard about this. And it's also about a kind of stress that most people haven't heard about.
I think a lot of people, more than we think, have heard that there's a heavy metal is in our diets, and they're finding out they're starting to hear it, though, as opposed to 20 years ago, excuse me, where they never heard anything about it. So explain to me, why is HHS, which of course is under new management, taking a new look at things like chelation and nutraceuticals?
Well, there's actually just a single driving force, and that's RFK. And he has himself actually used chelation for elevated levels of mercury, but he's also been a big proponent of generic supplements and nutraceuticals as a way to both treat conditions and establish good health. And he's been highly critical of the regulatory environment that really, until very recently, made life very difficult for nutraceuticals manufacturers. And some of that was legitimate because you have to make sure that the products are safe, and that's what the FDA kept on saying when they went after these products about their claims. But on the other hand, there's more and more clinical evidence, including in randomized clinical trials that wasn't around 5 years ago even, that really shows how a lot of these supplements and nutraceuticals are having a beneficial effect right across the board, from overall holistic health to cardiovascular disease to different types of stress-related maladies. So what RFK is basically saying here, and I have to say, it's been a bit lost in the wash about all this other stuff about vaccines and everything else. So we're not going to go to that today. We're just going to talk about this issue of how these nutraceuticals and chelation relate to the stress issues. So if people don't hear about vaccines and all that stuff, they'll probably be glad, because that has really masked what is the fundamental direction that Kennedy and his cohorts want to take. And the fundamental direction is to turn the whole healthcare and food system in America around from, first of all, treating symptoms instead of causes. So, basically pivoting to true causes. And what's a lot cheaper, of course, is prevention.
Right.
And so those two things relate also to, of course, our food industry. And the types of foods that are being offered up to people. And already RFK has called the heads of the food companies and said you're going to get rid of some of these dyes that are in these foods. So you can see this massive task that they are trying to undertake. In the face of stiff opposition, in the face of resistance, and we'll have to see how this all pans out, because there have also been some contradictions. RFK wants to take the toxins out of our diet, but on the other hand, the government has kind of slashed back the US EPA. So, that one remains to be seen how that's going to play out. So overall, the major message here is that for the first time, there's a major push towards pivoting from treating symptoms to preventing and treating the true causes of the chronic diseases that are killing and disabling the vast majority of Americans. And primarily, that's cardiovascular disease and autoimmune disease, and, of course, certain cancers. And so this is what they want to pivot to. And they're basically saying, in the past, we have paid a lot of attention to infectious diseases, which is fine. But now, the infectious diseases are, in terms of killing and maiming people, are a drop in the bucket compared to the 2,500 people who are dying every single day from cardiovascular disease. So, and part of that has been due to the success of hygiene and vaccines and everything else that has reduced the impact of infectious diseases. So our biggest challenge today is dealing with these chronic diseases that, unfortunately, we have all come to accept as, that's the way it is. Just as an example, with the measles story that has been playing quite a bit. 550 people so far have got this. They say there's more. There's been 2 or 3 deaths in the period that epidemic has started until now. 70,000 or more Americans have died from cardiovascular disease. So, that is why they want to focus much more on that and get rid of this idea that, yes, it's acceptable that we just, these people die of cardiovascular disease. And that's what he's trying to do.
And I love the fact that you said that, because I also believed for a very long time now that we should flip it. Like you said, we're looking at treating symptoms of diseases we're causing. One of the greatest things I heard him say is, why are we allowing things in this country that they outlaw in other countries? Dyes, like you mentioned, and things like that, and kids' cereals and things like that. If they're outlawed in other countries, we should take a closer look at it. And you brought up the measles thing. I was just reading about that the other day. I think that got a lot of attention because it's like you said, unusual, and we're so used to people dying from heart attacks. Well,
don't get me wrong. It's necessary for people to be vaccinated. Even RFK has said that his kids are vaccinated, but that's not what we're talking about today.
No,
we're talking about zeroing in on these chronic illnesses. And by the way, also especially for women, because more and more women are developing heart disease and having heart attacks at a younger age. And so, this is also important.
Okay, so let's get back to the heavy metals things, because I think a lot of people have heard hints about it, have heard like little snippets of it, but how can exposure to heavy metals contribute to things like chronic stress and relate to our health conditions?
Yeah. Well, the real thing is, what do they not contribute to? These heavy metals are nasty stuff. So what happens is that, and by the way, they've been with us for thousands and thousands of years. Ever since humans invented fire, burning wood that, by the way, contains heavy metals. So if you're breathing the smoke, you're breathing in the heavy metals. And since we invented agriculture, because metals in the soil tend to be taken up by cereals, for example, we've started accumulating these heavy metals in us. And of course, with today's society, where these heavy metals are used in a lot of industrial applications, they're endemic. It's not to say you can't do anything about them, but they get into us from air, water, food, you name it. In the military, it's shooting ranges and exposure to combat zones where there's more heavy metals around from weapons. In anyone who's a mechanic is more exposed to these heavy metals. So multiple exposure pathways. So that's the key thing. Now, why is this stuff bad for you? Because when it gets inside you, it lodges in your tissue, and it starts biochemically affecting your cells, the elastic fiber in your body that drives every move you make in all of your organs. It degrades the elastic in your body, which means it degrades your skin, and it is a primary trigger and has been designated a year and a half ago by the American Heart Association as the first environmental factor to be a major heart disease risk factor. So it's bad news for your arteries because it gets into the wall of the artery and it causes a chronic inflammatory response. Plus, it degrades the elastic that lets your artery expand and contract to pump blood around the body along with your heart. So, and it's carcinogenic.
Mm-hmm.
So, you name it, this stuff is bad for you. And most of the studies that have been done around the individual effects of these metals. But there is a nasty side story to this, and that is we're not just exposed to individual metals. We're exposed to a soup of them, and the interactions between these heavy metals are even worse than the individual metals themselves. So a lot of these, and this is what I call hidden stress. And in the book, Discovering the Nature of Longevity. And I call it hidden stress because the vast majority of people, if they are tested for heavy metals, and most people are not, but if they are, they'll do a blood test or a urine test. Well, guess what? Blood tests and urine tests don't show the heavy metals in your tissue. So these tests can be very misleading as to what your true heavy metals load is. And I'll stop there, and we can move forward with other questions.
Well, I was going to bring up a question that you already answered, was because we, at the American Institute of Stress, you know that we have a good relationship with our military and our first responders and things like that. And we have Combat Stress Magazine, and a couple of people have been talking about how the military, they've been finding, and particularly for veterans, they have high levels of of heavy metals in their body, and you explained why, because they deal with not only heavy equipment, and I guess gunpowder in general probably gets into your system. I probably got some from that as
It's
well.
actually well, gunpowder. Yes, it's what happens is when a bullet comes out of the muzzle of a gun, you get this backdraft right in your face, and that smoke is full of heavy metals,
Right.
lead in particular, from the projectile. And so, yes, and it's not just military; it's anyone who's at a shooting range, and shooting ranges are notorious for being contaminated by lead. So I want to emphasize: yes, military personnel, yes, but women of childbearing age, it's a real problem because they're exposed to this, and the fetus is exposed to it, and it causes problems with the fetus as well. So no matter where you look, this exposure is not good, and we're not testing adequately for it, and we're not taking adequate steps to get rid of this stuff, also as a preventative measure.
It's funny you mentioned that, usually they do a blood test or a urine test. This last 6 months, I've had like 4 or 5 different blood tests for no reason other than they got nervous about like one hemoglobin point higher. Fine, I'm at the age where I say, okay, just check me out. Not once did they ever mention heavy metals or anything like that. Not once. So it's interesting that maybe people should start asking, how do I
Yeah.
find that out?
And and that's one reason why Kennedy's got a little tick about this, because
Mhm.
he was exposed to he had high levels of mercury. I have high levels of mercury, by the way. So
Right.
I mean, it's a real issue that is a non-issue, and that's what people like Kennedy want to bring that to the forefront.
I wonder because mercury it used to be a real problem in this country, mostly due to hat makers and people in industries that used it. And but is it in our food, mercury? I've
Uh,
heard that is in especially in fish. But
yeah, you know where it is? It's in fireworks. It's in,
oh,
for example, you can get it from burning coal.
yeah, okay.
Um, so it's used in a lot of industrial processes, and you get these emissions into the air, and then people breathe it. So again, there's multiple exposure. People somehow think that mercury isn't used in industry anymore. Well, it is.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm sure. That I'm going back
Oh, and by the
hundreds of
way,
years. So
yeah, I mean anyone who is our age,
yeah.
and even today, amalgam fillings, they're full of mercury, and that's probably where my mercury comes from.
My
So
my daughter yelled at me the other day because I haven't had my fillings replaced in 50 years. So
yeah, well, most of mine have been replaced, but there's still a couple in there,
me too.
which I should be getting rid of. But that's what you have to balance the trauma to the tooth of not getting toxified. So
Right.
it's a judgment call. So anyways, you've got these multiple exposure pathways.
Okay, so let's talk about chelation therapy. First of all, I think a lot of people don't know what it is or how it works to remove heavy metals from the body. So give us the Will Heckman understanding version of that.
Yeah. Well, chelation is a very big word that covers a very broad and deep uh, field. And the traditional understanding of chelation therapy is something where a chelating chemical, and chelating is actually to chelate is the Greek term for to grab. So basically, what happens is when you have a chelator, it goes in and it chemically grabs the heavy metal and transports it away. That's the fundamental part of it. So it binds to the heavy metal, and then it carries it out of your body. You excrete it. Okay, you pee it out basically. So that's the real short story of chelation therapy. It's this therapy is delivered several different types of chemicals depending on the heavy metals. Something known as EDTA is the most commonly known, but there's a lot of others with acronyms that I'm not going to bother people with right now, but they're used for mercury and different things. And this is important to know, that it's not just one chemical that is used, but several. And some of them are, the EDTA, for example, is usually delivered via intravenous. And that means you go into a clinic and they put a needle in your arm for a couple of hours and they circulate this stuff through your body, and then you pee it out.
Mhm.
And that therapy can take if you do it once a week, it can take up to a year to
Wow.
do what it's intended to do. So, but it's also used to get rid of this problem, or get away from this problem of the blood tests not showing the accurate level. So, what is done is something called the challenge test, and the challenge test is you get maybe a half hour of chelation, and then you pee it out, and they measure the metals in your pee, and it's a completely different level than your normal urine test, which is the baseline. And I've had that done, and it's just stunning, the difference. Like usually they say, oh yeah, you're within baseline. Well, you do the challenge test, whoa, a lot of people like me are way over baseline. So having said that, one of the challenges, and hopefully this is one of the things that Kennedy's going to address, is there's no standardized challenge test across the country. Like there's no different clinics might use different ways of doing these challenge tests, and you really do need a more standardized approach to this. But because regulators have really not been very favorable towards chelation, except in very extreme cases of metal poisoning, there's been no effort to kind of standardize this. Well, not no effort. There are some chelation organizations that have tried to standardize it, but there's by no means yet a national standard. So the traditional form of chelation is this intravenous chelation, and there's a very important but to this. There are other products that do oral chelation. And why is this important? Because it's so much more patient friendly.
Right.
Okay. But the problem has been that chelating chemicals such as EDTA are destroyed by stomach acids, and they become completely ineffective if you swallow them just, as EDTA. And so you can't chelate. And what has happened in the last 20 years is that with the invention of something called enteric coatings, which allows a drug to bypass the stomach into the small intestine, that has allowed the capsule to dissolve in the small intestine, and then the EDTA is absorbed through the intestinal wall, and that's much more effective. And in fact, there are several products out there today. One of them is called Nanobac TX. It's by Nanobiotech Pharma. It's been on the market for more than 25 years. And in the past 20 of those years, they've used these enteric coatings that, have allowed that to happen. Before, they used a suppository, which again, Americans don't really like that. So he went to a completely oral formula. And like I said, it's been around for years and years and years. I've used it, for like more than 18 months when I was being treated. And so yes, it's there. By the way, I have no financial interest in the company. So that's a form of oral chelation. Also, chelators for mercury are sometimes taken orally as well. I think a product called DMSA is used for that. Don't quote me on that. People should look it up. And by the way, I just want to emphasize right now, everything we're talking about on this show, people need to consult with a qualified physician before they try any of this. So I'm not giving people advice saying use this and use that. I'm just giving you the basic information, on what is out there. So I can't emphasize that enough. But if you want to learn more about all this stuff, again, that's why one of the main reasons why I wrote Discovering the Nature of Longevity was to actually show what has been going on in this space. And it doesn't stop.
They interrupt you. Tell people where they can get the book.
You can get the book on Amazon. Just go to Amazon.com and put it in Discovering the Nature.
I'll put the title down on the bottom so people remember. Yeah. Write it down.
Yeah.
You need to take charge of your own health, because half of the doctors, I'm being kind. Most doctors are not even going to mention heavy metals.
Yes. And so what the book does is it talks about, for example, the clinical trials that have been going on with chelation therapy. And that has been very interesting on its own. We can talk about that because there have been $70 million worth of clinical trials on chelation therapy for cardiovascular disease, and the results have been contradictory. It's quite interesting.
Really?
So the book talks about that stuff. It talks about the oral chelators, and it talks about the experiences of physicians and patients with that.
Okay.
There's far more to it. The book covers a lot more. It has a chapter on heavy metals. It has a chapter on the elastic fiber in your body that is drives every move you make and that is harmed by these heavy metals. It has a chapter on how infection is another type of hidden stress that actually causes a lot of these problems as well. And by the way, when we're talking about heavy metals and infection, we're not talking about toxic levels, high levels. We're talking about low levels that often escape detection. And so over time, these build up in your tissue and they go undetected. And that is part of the problem. But it starts at a very young age. And, that's all of these onslaughts. Just for example, last year, about 300 babies across the US came down with lead poisoning from baby food. Right. And it was a particular additive that was a spice that was put into the baby food. And because the FDA does not require companies to publish any results of testing that they have done on their baby foods, for example, it escaped notice. And so you can see how this is getting into our kids and our babies without us knowing it.
I have so many questions. First of all, I think it's unbelievable that the FDA doesn't require people who sell us baby food to test and report what they find.
The state of California does. It just came into effect January 1st this year. So
the other question I wanted to ask you is because you said the delivery method is through IV. I have a lot of guy friends now who are on TRT, and they self-administer that through an injection. Is that something that chelation could do instead of taking?
Injection and infusion are two different things. So the infusion is a constant flow of this stuff over a period of hours, whereas the injection is just what they call a bolus that you inject, through a needle. They're two very different things. Having said that, as we get on in the show, I'm going to talk about some of the cutting edge research that has been done where indeed actually there is an injection.
I also wanted to ask you because you mentioned babies. Does age play a part in this? I mean,
well,
I've been exposed to this stuff a lot longer than a lot of people. So is it more important to start at a younger age getting tested for it?
Yes,
or
because
especially for seniors?
It's important to get the kids tested for the simple reason that that's when your cells are still multiplying. That's when you're still growing. And heavy metals are bad news for that type of growth. Your body just doesn't like them at all. And as far as older people are concerned, yes, because it's bioaccumulative. It accumulates over time. It builds up and it builds up. Now, your body does naturally get rid of some of these. It's adapted to heavy metals over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, but it's overwhelmed. It doesn't seem able to get rid of all of them. There are also some foods that chelate heavy metals, like cilantro, for example, and broccoli sprouts are particularly good at it. There's a number of them. And
I like one out of the two.
Yeah, right. And the ironic thing is that you'd better use organically sourced spices because sometimes they're contaminated with heavy metals from pesticides and fertilizers. So the very, the very spices that can actually chelate, help your body to get rid of these, are also sometimes contaminated with heavy metals. So you've got to be very careful about where you buy this stuff from.
Right. Well, you should be careful about where you buy anything these days. I'm lucky I live in an area where there's a lot of locally grown stuff. So then Douglas, I don't understand then. Why is chelation therapy so controversial? And there are some, I've heard controversial things. So what are the main concerns raised by, I don't know, the medical community? Because God knows they have
Mhm.
a lot to
It-
say about
right.
how we treat things.
So it comes down to two or three areas. Behind it is a sort of an inborn skepticism uh, developed, especially at the beginning when chelation therapy was first introduced. In like the early 1990s, it became more broadly used, and at that point, there were one or two deaths from overdosing. And this became a huge scandal because naturally the pharmaceuticals companies and other companies that are selling high priced drugs aren't too keen on the idea that actually, if you took chelation, it might help you with some of these. So they jumped on these early deaths. But you know something? There's hundreds of thousands of deaths every year from accidental medical overdoses of drugs. And chelation was nothing new, especially when you've got the introduction and they're still trying to get it right. So that stuck for decades. They always went back, and said, "Oh, it's dangerous, if used improperly." Well, guess what? Any drug is dangerous if used
You could die
improperly.
from Advil.
So yeah, so and today there's a very sort of strict regimen for how chelation should be applied. You don't want to put too much of it in the mix. So that's number one. Number two, this series of studies, these randomized blinded clinical trials that were financed by the National Institutes of Health over the past 15 years, although they had varying results, there is one thing they proved beyond a doubt. And the papers that are published on this are quite clear. Chelation is safe when properly administered, period. So that one should come off the table. You always have to do it with a qualified professional, but it should come off the table as a reason not to use chelation therapy. The other thing is that you usually need to administer supplements and nutraceuticals like vitamin C and other things, and that's what they did in the clinical trial, because it does tend to chelate some metals that are that you need, and so you don't want to pull too much calcium out of your bones and stuff like that. So they are using this combination of nutraceuticals that prevents that from happening. So again, this is all part of the regimen. So there's been the opposition based on way old evidence. It's now been proven to be safe. But then the third thing is it's commonly used for treating heavy metal poisoning. But heart disease is another matter. And that's what these clinical trials were about, to see if people who'd had a heart attack had any greater survivability, especially diabetics, than the ordinary person who had not had chelation. And the interesting thing is that in the first cohort, the cohort that were diabetic had a 41% reduction in all causes of mortality, which is significant. But in the second one, there was no difference, and so they were scratching their heads. They were saying, "Why is it that in this first group we had this reduction, and in the second group we didn't?" Well, one of the possible explanations is that in the period between the first and the second study, lead levels in the United States plummeted. And so the amount of lead that was actually going into a lot of these patients was minimal. And even though it was being chelated out, it was a fraction of a fraction. So what does that tell you? It doesn't tell you that chelation doesn't work for cardiovascular disease, especially in diabetics. it tells you that in regions where there is a high heavy metal load, it works a lot better. And that, by the way, is about 90% of the population of the world, because the United States and Canada are the areas where, the lead levels have been pretty strictly controlled. And as a result of that, went down. They took the lead out of gasoline, took the lead out of paint. They're getting the lead out of pipes. But in a lot of other areas of the world, you still have that. So yeah, the problem is now you got to spend another 35 million, going around the world outside the US. And that was not going to happen under the old regime. Whether it happens under the RFK regime remains to be seen. So the skepticism is around these contradictory results relating to cardiovascular disease. But I have to emphasize something else. If you look at products like Nanobac TX, for example, and it's not the only one, I just speak about it because it's one that I've used and I've studied. They have a lot more in that capsule than just the nutraceuticals that you use to protect yourself from depleting your minerals and the EDTA itself. But they also have a whole bunch of other things that promote vascular health. And that combination, Will, of promoting vascular health and doing the chelation has, in anecdotal studies, been quite effective. That's the only thing that I can say. So there haven't been any double-blinded randomized clinical trials. Why is that? There's been no double-blinded randomized clinical trials of these types of nutraceuticals because nutraceuticals companies can't afford them. The regulatory environment makes you spend $30 or $40 million and more to do these trials, and nutraceuticals companies usually operate on much lower margins than the pharma companies do.
And they usually take like 10 years, right?
Yeah. And so one of the things that we would like to see is the NIH and organizations like that funding more of these clinical studies of the combination of nutraceuticals and chelation therapy to see what those effects are. And I think that's where RFK is going with this.
I think, you're right. It's time to really take a real close look at them. And I think you're also right about saying that some of their concerns are, I don't want to say they're ridiculous, but they're just not meaningful anymore. Certainly, when you say you have to, if you do chelation therapy, that you have to take some supplements because some of the things that chelation takes out we need. Well, guess what, everybody? If you take a course of antibiotics, you need to take a probiotic. It's the same thing. It's
Exactly.
not abnormal. It's something that you should be aware of. That's all. All the things that you're telling me about chelation therapy makes me want to go out and try do it so far.
Yeah.
Especially the guy my age. What I wanted to ask you though, okay, so we go through the chelation therapy and we focus in on stress and things like that. So I wanted to know, when you do your chelation therapy, is what it helps alleviate. Like we have high levels of stress, and we know that heavy metals exacerbate it.
It's a good question. Yeah, I get your question. So the chelators are not just chelating heavy metals. They're anti-inflammatory, and they kill a lot of stealth infections as well. They have they have an antibiotic quality to them. Most people aren't told that chelators like EDTA actually have these other properties connected to them, which might explain why a lot of people, they say, anecdotal evidence, that when they finish their chelation, they just feel a lot better because you've got this anti-inflammatory process going on. So that's that answers your question about is it only that, or is it something else? And by the way, I just want to emphasize again that it's not just heart disease. There's a whole raft of mental and physiological conditions that are triggered by these heavy metals.
I wanted to ask you specifically about a couple because I've read some relationship that after people have gone through chelation therapy and have gotten rid of, oh, I don't think they get rid of all. I don't know. You could tell me, or most of the the heavy metals in your
Yeah,
body.
some are tougher than others.
Yeah,
Like cadmium is a tough one to get out. It binds very closely, and you can remove it. But but lead, yes, that's a big one for
and
sure.
like you said, mercury. But after you're done with that, do people see a difference in their anxiety levels, a difference in their fatigue or brain fog and things like that?
Again, because there have been no randomized double-blinded clinical trials, all the evidence is anecdotal.
Right.
But the answer is yes, people have reported that. They've reported that they feel better. And by the way, that's called a patient reported outcome. So PROM. It's not ignored in the medical community. It's just that it's usually done alongside and as part of these clinical trials. But whenever you say anecdotal,
Right.
a lot of cynics or skeptics, shall I say, well, that's just not enough. That's too subjective.
Really, a
Well,
patient coming back and saying, "Hey, that worked is not good for you."
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So
please.
and also there's this really weird thing about, do you have a mouse model that proves it? It's really amazing that some of these therapies that are very effective in patients are criticized because they didn't have a mouse model first, and the doctor's saying, "Well, hell, the patient's getting better." Yeah, but you don't have a mouse model to prove it.
Oh,
And this has been a big issue that it gets turned on its head when you get this work being done often in humans before they're done in rodents.
hey, any side effects when you're going through it or when you're done? And
Yeah, I mean,
can they be managed?
some people don't respond well.
Okay,
Uh, for the nutraceuticals, the oral nutraceuticals, you can have gas, stomach upset. A lot of that could be solved by things like Imodium and
right.
taking probiotics. So yes, and it's not for everybody. To be clear, some people just have reactions to it. So this is why you need to do it, in collaboration with a qualified physician.
I had a reaction to penicillin. So I mean, it happens. You
Well, if you look at any drug that you take, if you look at the very long list of side effects that come inside this pamphlet that rolls out like this,
right.
a lot of the drugs that have been approved by regulators have a lot of side effects. This is not new, and usually it says, "Do not take this drug if you have this, and that."
Right.
So the chelation is no different.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, I see labels like that, and I have friends who can't take, like I mentioned before, Advil, because they have a bad
Sure.
reaction to it. And uh, I've learned on a personal level not to take Advil and then spend 6 hours in the sun. It's a bad idea. So same, I would think that's a totally acceptable answer. That yeah, sometimes there can be some side effect, but you have an upset stomach for a while, do something about that. Treat that instead of the 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 negative effects of having those heavy metals in your body for yeah your whole life. I wanted to ask you about because we mentioned him a couple of times as RFK Jr.'s role and for chelation therapy and public health. What has he been saying? And I know he's been critical of the FDA regulations on the treatment. What exactly is he saying? What exactly does he think he wants to change? I liked a lot of the things he's when he was actually running for president. Um, I was very happy to see personally somebody who cares so much about, especially about children's health and the health of the public, put in charge of HHS. What exactly is his criticism of the FDA when it comes to chelation?
Well, number one, he claims that they've been suppressing positive data. That is yet to be shown, but that's what he's saying, and he's saying he's going to get that data released. The second thing is to do more testing, and the third thing is to develop different methods of chelation. And I want to talk about that right now for a moment, because the fact is that IV chelation therapy is really it's not patient friendly. You got to go to a clinic, and a lot of people can't do that. And it can be expensive, but I really couch that because, as a physician said to me once, expensive compared to what? The copay involved in all the drugs that you're taking and the $150,000 surgery that you need for arterial replacement. And by the time you're finished with it, the amount of money that you spent on your copay from your insurance by far exceeds the cost of the chelation. So because chelation, and that's another thing that RFK wants to do, he wants it insured.
Yeah.
He wants to have the insurance companies cover it. So usually it's not insured. Sometimes it is, but usually it's not insured. And therefore, it looks on the surface like it's a lot more expensive. But if you factor in the alternatives, like I said, the copay on the drugs, the copay on the surgery, and everything else, you get a very different story. And unfortunately, the patients are not, told that story. So he wants the insurers to start covering this, and then he wants more investigations into alternative therapies. And I hope he's listening to this show, because I have to say, and just to for disclosure, I am a co-founder of a company called Elastrin Therapeutics. Now, Elastrin Therapeutics for the past 8 years has been working on, and you mentioned at the top of the show, a therapy that repairs and restores the elastic fiber in your body. So elastin drives every move you make and every breath you take. You can't have sex without it. You can't see or smile or do a whole lot of other things, anything that involves movement, without elastin fiber. It's one of the best kept secrets. And the reason it's the best kept secret is because no one has known how to treat damaged elastin, even though your body stops producing it in your late 20s, and it starts degrading and causing all kinds of trouble like chronic inflammation and aging processes. So what we focused on is developing a nanotechnology that delivers drugs directly to damaged elastin. Now, why is that important? That's important because damaged elastin is also the location of hardening and stiffening, fibrosis, and calcification. And this calcification is the stuff that hardens your arteries. And it's endemic in the population, So, and chelation is targeted at calcification. Again, no randomized double-blinded clinical trials. The ones that they didn't measure removal of calcification, but it's been clearly shown in animal models that you can remove the calcification by doing this. And what this therapy that was developed at Clemson University by Professor Naren Vivahari and Dr. Charles Rice, it targets this damaged elastin. And so you get very high amounts of a chelator at the site of the calcification without shotgunning the rest of the body. Because the therapy uses an antibody to attach itself to damaged elastin fiber where the problem starts. And this is really revolutionary. I mean, the former director of the NIH said this could, in fact, reverse cardiovascular disease. That's what he said.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So this is due to the advances in nanotechnology.
Yeah, and this is a bit of rocket science. You're combining, a lipid nanoparticle with a chelator, and then attaching them to a elastin specific antibody for damaged elastin. And that's pretty sophisticated stuff. So and it requires a horrendous regulatory process that you have to go through. So what, Mr. Kennedy, if you're listening, could you please help us to accelerate this regulatory review and encourage all of your wealthy investor friends to start investing in these types of technologies that are going to truly attack the real source of cardiovascular disease. And that is my message today. That's what we need. Because right now, I would guess that, at the most, a few tens or 20s or maybe $100 million has gone into research on this advanced form of chelation. Whereas with other drugs, it's billions and billions of dollars. Yep. And so what we really need is more investors to get on board with this, and they will do this if they have encouragement from the FDA and the NIH. And so hopefully that's what Mr. Kennedy is going to do.
Douglas says it was a good message to end this show on, because we're running out of time. But I tell you what, if nothing else, I hope everybody that's listening, it piqued your curiosity about chelation therapy and the effects of heavy metals and what it's doing to us. And one of the things that you said before about the cost of it is absolutely true. We have to think long term. You may pay for chelation therapy, but never have to pay for open heart surgery, which is a lot more.
Especially if you've got a high heavy metals load. And before we finish, I just want to show the book.
Please do.
Just so the people have, seen it. So, Discovering the Nature of Longevity, Restoring the Heart and Body by Targeting Hidden Stress. And again, it's available on Amazon.com, and you can go there and get it. And it's a Kindle book, but it's also paperback.
And I'll put up your website as well so people can.
The website is www.calcify.com. That's CALCIFY.com. That's the short name. And the long name is www.natureoflongevity, all one word, .com. And there you'll find more information as well.
And I'll put both of them up so people can write them down. Go there. You need to read some things. Be your own advocate. Be your own, healthcare provider. Because if you rely on everyone else, your 10-minute visit with your doctor is not going to cure everything, and they're not even going to look at. How many of you out there have had your doctor say, "Hey, we need to take a look at the heavy metals in your body"?
Yeah, good point.
I haven't. And I like my doctor. He's a cool guy, and my doctor knows me for 25 years. He's never said that. Of course, I'm in better shape than he is, but that has nothing to do with it. All right. Lastly, Douglas, we ask all our guests the same question. I'm going to ask you, buddy, the same thing, because, by the way, if you're thinking right now, what the hell does all this have to do with stress? One of the number one or the top three things that stress us out is our health. So if you're going through health issues, I promise your stress levels are through the roof.
Yeah, and heavy metals and low-grade infections are a form of hidden stress. And that's the subtitle of the book.
And that's why we talk about it.
So that's the key thing.
And that's why we talk about it. And that's why I want to know what Douglas does to alleviate his stress. What's your go-to stress thing? What's your stress management tool? I know it, but I want everybody else to hear it, because I think you're crazy, but
well, it's open ocean swimming. So, every day or every second day, I'm down there, and I'm in the water for, about 45 minutes, which, when the water temperature is about 28 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 Celsius, it's quite invigorating. I've got a great wetsuit. And that's a key thing to be able to do that. But I ocean swim all year round, and this has really saved me. I probably wouldn't be with you today if I hadn't been ocean swimming, because I actually had to give up running. I used to run 10 to 15 kilometers. And I can tell you, as you get older, that's a really bad idea.
Yeah.
It's too much stress on your joints for most people. Some people can do it, but I was starting to have back problems and knee problems, and that all went away when I started ocean swimming. So it's a great sort of all body exercise.
It probably relieves a hell of a lot of inflammation in your body getting into that water that cold. Hey, it's like everyone's doing ice plunges now. Douglas started doing it years ago.
That's different though.
Oh,
That's
I
that's
know.
you got to be careful there because that can really shock your system.
Yeah.
But this is like prolonged ocean swimming, and it's just really great. You're glad to be alive when you get out.
And I hope everyone who's been listening to us got a lot of good information today besides going swimming in the cold water. You got to find something that you like to do to for your go-to stress management tool. Douglas, thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us today. It was fascinating, and I hope a lot of people buy your book and look into it. It's your health. You need to do something about it. So thank you, Douglas.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's going to do it for today. This has been your host, Will Heckman. Don't forget to join us at stress.org, and please follow the podcast and subscribe. And I want to remind everyone, just as I said, stress is different for each of us. There's no one stress reduction management strategy that's right for everyone. So that means you need to join us next time to explore more stress management strategies and insights. So have a good day, everyone.